Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Hi, Lisa. Hey, Katie. How you doing? Wonderful. All right. We have a great guest today. I'm really excited about this, so we're going to jump right in. Today's guest is Rachel Millner. How are you, Rachel? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started with our big question and our discussion, why don't you let our listeners know the work you do?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist, and I practice, I live outside of Philadelphia, and I have a group private practice there where I do clinical work. I work primarily with folks who have eating disorders, disordered eating. I'm also a fat activist, so I do a lot of fat liberation work. I do a lot of speaking at various conferences and institutions talking about fat liberation, health at every size, body trust, and I'm also a mom of 12-year-old twins.
That's wonderful. Lisa and I have kids about that age.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we're in the thick of the preteens. Wonderful. Well, that's great. Let's get started and ask the big question and have a conversation today. So what is a belief that you once had that you no longer have that has impacted your life in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I love this question. I think what immediately comes to my mind is the belief that my body was a problem and that the only way to solve the problem of my body was to figure out how to be thin.
Yeah. I think that is so many of our ridiculous beliefs, but it feels normal because of the culture that we grow up in and that we live in. So, when you were in that place of feeling like your body was the problem, and as someone who, previously felt that way about my body, I understand it's a journey. You don't just wake up one morning like, oh, it's not the problem anymore. We're good. Let's go. But when you were in that space and you made the transition to recognizing that your body was not the problem, was never the problem, what triggered that for you? What started that change? And then what did it change in your behaviors and your outlook on life and how you showed up in the world?
Yeah. I think like many people, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of weight stigma and a lot of focus on thinness and on my body in particular. And that kind of spiraled me into many years of struggling with various eating disorders. And for me, at one point in the course of my various eating disorders, I did end up in a smaller body. And I think during that time, I thought that was freedom. I thought I had finally figured it out. And then as I got into therapy and started doing some healing work, realized that I was probably more trapped then than I had ever been when my body was fat. And so once I started to realize that, I think there was, like you said, it's a long time. I don't want to minimize at all how many years of therapy and hard work. But as soon as even the possibility of not blaming my body opened up, things started to change because it wasn't something I had ever considered before. I thought it could be true for other people, but I didn't believe it could be true for me. And so when the possibility of it being true for me just started to open up a little bit, it changed how I showed up in my relationships, how I felt in my body, how I presented in the world, the things I was willing to say or speak up about shifted. And then from there, it grew because that awareness became a deep knowing instead of just a slight possibility.
And I think you're highlighting something that is really valuable here, that the work that we do in this area is doesn't just stay in that compartment, if you will. In fact, it's so funny how all this always connects. I was writing an email today for our community about this idea that when we rely on that
freedom that we're looking for on something that's outside of us, right? The size of our body, the size of our bank account, our achievements, our accolades. When anything that we rely on outside of us is the thing that we think will give us that liberation on the inside, it's like our first clue that we're actually not on the right path, that we've been believing something that was told to us that is not necessarily true or isn't true, right? It's like, that's what we've said for a long time here at WeShape, is that you are not after weight loss. You are after personal peace and personal liberation and freedom. And it does not have anything to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's capitalism, right? Like this idea of finding something external, whether it is changing your body size or a certain amount of money or access or privilege or whatever it is. And it's all a lie.
And when you think about, like, then you throw in the patriarchy, and you think about women and traditionally and historically our roles, we had less, what we consider at the time, we had less control over maybe the bank account or the career. And so what do women do? What can we control? Our bodies.
Or we think we can.
think we can. Yeah. And so it's like, it makes sense that when you put all those pieces together, it's like, of course, if you are told that your worth is inherently based on how you look, you aren't really given permission or access to be able to go, even try, like maybe more men do, to grow their bank accounts. Then it's like, it's like the writing's on the wall, what we're going to try to control.
Okay.
Yep.
For sure. I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned that at some point during your journey, you did end up in a smaller body and you were even more trapped than you had been previously. Can you talk about like what that felt like and why you think that was, and like what was coming up for you? I have some experiences when I got to my thinnest self as well, and it was not what I had expected or hoped. So I would love to hear, what that looked like for you.
Yeah. For me, in order to be in a smaller body, I was starving myself. I was exercising for very long periods of time. I had to isolate myself from people because I was afraid of being seen, even though my body was smaller, which is what I was told I was supposed to want. I was more afraid of being seen. So I was like hiding my body under like baggy clothes, or like I wouldn't wear short sleeves, like all of these things that were supposed to suddenly open up to me when I was in a smaller body were actually harder. So I had to give up everything. My whole life had to be focused on being in a smaller body because that's the only way that I could do it. Like it had to take all my energy. And of course that meant I lost all of the joy and connection and pleasure and possibility. It all had to be put to the side in order to have this one focus on thinness.
Yeah, I can totally relate. And I remember in order for me to get to my thinnest, I don't know how much I weighed, and I don't know how much I weigh now because I don't even check anymore because who cares? But I would say if I had to guess, I was probably 60 pounds lighter than I am now. And I remember some celebration and like being happy, right? Because I put on a cute dress and I went to an event and I had some friends say, "Oh my gosh, look at you." So I started getting celebrated, right? And that felt really good. But what I noticed is after all the comments, when I would be alone by myself in bed, I wasn't satisfied. And I was thinking, just like you, obsessing, like, okay, what diet can I start next week to just lose like 7 more pounds? I mean, I would just have these ridiculous numbers and ideas around it. And it didn't matter how small I got. And that was the revelation. It doesn't matter how small I get. I'm never going to be satisfied. And in order to even try to stay this size or get even smaller, I have to obsess about this thing every single day. So I absolutely relate to what you said about being trapped, because you are. Because now you don't want to look like the failure for gaining the weight back. Now you're uncomfortable because people really are staring at you because you look so different than you used to. And your whole life, it just revolves around, what am I going to eat? How am I going to move? I was exercising 7 days a week, no breaks, and it's exhausting and it's overwhelming. And when I work with clients now, when they've identified like a size they used to be that they want to get back to, and we'll have like a really long conversation about that. And what they find out, or what they realize every time during the conversation, is when they were in that body that they have in their mind, or the picture that they keep on their phone, they didn't like their bodies then either. So it's never been about the body. Not ever. Like at all.
Yeah, it's so true. I remember, I think one of the things that really like drove it home for me was that I knew I had an eating disorder when I was in a small body. I was in graduate school at the time. I knew I had anorexia. And so when people would celebrate and compliment and say, "Oh, how are you doing it?" I got really annoyed by that question. And I would often say, "Oh, I have an eating disorder. I have anorexia." And people still were like, "Well, keep it up." Or, would compliment or celebrate. And that for me, I think was like, oh, right, this is all a fucking lie. Like this whole thing that we've been sold, like, is such a mindfuck that people are praising anorexia if it meant being thin. And I think that for me was like, okay, this is not about my body.
Not at all. And then that I could see, I don't know if that is when you started to think about like fat activism, but to me, that line leads directly to that, because it's like, oh, this isn't about my body. This is about our society hating fat people so much that it's worth them harming themselves, nearly dying to be thin. And that is infuriating. Like that's just so messed up. I can't even believe it.
It's reminding me of this time. So when I was 12 or 13 years old, my little brother went to a preschool, like a home-based preschool. And I had, they were like, "Okay, did you want to be a helper?" I was like, "Absolutely." So I would like come and work at the preschool in the summer for like 3 hours in the morning. And there was a toddler there that they had on a diet. She was like 3 years old. And I remember, I can like feel the feeling in my body right now, feeling like, I don't know why I feel uncomfortable. And then feeling so confused because the adults were telling me this is what needs to happen and this is what needs to happen and this is what she's allowed to eat. So I remember feeling like disjointed, like something doesn't feel right, but I'm just a child, so I must be wrong.
Right.
And like, it just really goes to show you that like, this is not how we're born. Like, this is not normal. Like, it's so messed up. And, like, kids know it, and we just get, like, so talked out of things by adults and by the culture, and it's just so devastating because that poor little girl, like, 3 years old. That is so heartbreaking. Terrible.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking. That's going to be, potentially some of her earliest memories, like, being denied food.
And then like sitting at a table with other children and being
eating. So.
And like it's just it really is so upsetting. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so upsetting. It's really disturbing. It gives me the ick. And also, but like this is still going on.
Right.
Like I know that was many years ago. But like they did that because the doctor told them to do that.
Yeah.
And that's an even like larger issue, right? Because we put certain people in certain positions and then we say they know despite my intuition, despite what doesn't feel right for me, despite, we had someone on yesterday where she was talking like, I was telling her, I'm just like, oh, I'm so, we used to have a very different company that was like about weight loss and stuff. And I'm very familiar with the community and the people who had similar businesses. And I'm like, oh, I'm just waiting for these people to come in and see that like body liberation and body neutrality and that movement will be a way for them to capitalize.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to like keep trying to remind people that when you are buying products or joining communities, if anyone is asserting themselves as a guru over your body, that is your first clue that you're in the wrong spot.
Right.
Like nobody has the knowing that you do of your own body. And if something doesn't feel right, and even if it's a doctor, you go somewhere else. And I always want to take the opportunity to say that because I think we give our power away.
You do, yeah.
So much.
Yep.
So much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I have kids, and when your kids are young, especially you've got that like new parent anxiety and you go to a doctor and they're telling you something like, I have so much compassion for parents who are trying to do what's right for their kids and may have a sense that something feels off, but the doctor is telling me to do it. And now, I don't know if it's last year or the year before that the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with their horrifying statement that included talking about putting kids as young as 2 on diets, potentially using weight loss medications in kids, bariatric surgery in teenagers with no research. When I went through and just kind of picked it apart, there's no data. The risk to these kids is incredibly high. And I think, you said before that they're willing to risk the lives of fat people in order to attempt to make us thin. And parents, for the most part, are trying to do what's right, and the doctor's telling them this. I feel lucky because as a parent, I had already known about fat liberation before my kids were born, and I had to start opting them out of things in preschool. It was as young as preschool when, the local, I think they called it a Kid Fit program came into preschool, which sounds fine until you look at the curriculum and it's talking about, preventing weight gain or different kinds of foods being, quote unquote, good and bad. And I'm like, sorry, my kids can't participate in this. But if I didn't know, who would think you have to opt your kids out of something in preschool?
No way, you wouldn't. And because it sounds like, they're trying to make sure that we value and center health. And I've had a similar issue with my kids' school. If I go to a school, I love the school, the staff and the way that they try to engage the kids. But yeah, their thinking around bodies and weight and health and nutrition are just very antiquated, and it's not based on real research, and it's definitely not helpful. And so I find myself asserting myself a lot. Like, hey, let's rethink this. Some of the fitness tests that they do in PE and some of the discussions, they've made comments about sending only healthy snacks, in kids' lunches. And, I'm very adamant about, obviously I offer my kids variety of food. Like we make a lunch, it usually has some level of vegetable, carbohydrate, fat in it. And then they pick their snacks. And I don't really care. I just tell them to try to get a fruit because, it helps with your digestion. And that's about it. Otherwise, they kind of have free reign. And I don't want them going to school shamed because they got an Oreo. They got Oreo cookies for a snack or, some little muffin. I don't care. You eat what you want to eat. And you listen to what your body is telling you about what you're eating so that you can make decisions. And this is a journey, right? This is really hard to do as a parent who lived in diet culture for so long. But we have to advocate for ourselves, for our children. We have to speak up when it's uncomfortable. And I feel you. I have so much compassion for parents too, because yes, we are all, for the most part, trying to do the very best. And when you look at a physician, a doctor, a healthcare professional as an authority in an area that you didn't go to school for, that you don't necessarily understand, it makes sense that you would just follow what the doctor's saying. But, I guess that's about developing your own sense of intuition and just knowing when something doesn't feel right, even if it's just enough to make you Google something. You know what I mean? Just maybe let me double check this. I may not be able to go get a second opinion from another physician, but let me just Google this. Let me see what is out there in the world and on the internet about this particular thing so that maybe I can be opened up to a new a new idea or a new, option
And
for
I
my
think
child.
even asking, like, one of the reasons I've been able to stay with our family physician for the last almost 12 years is because right off the bat, I was allowed to have an opinion.
Yeah.
And he was very clear about trusting my intuition. In fact, when I knew that I was pregnant and the blood test said I wasn't, I called him back and I said, no, I am. And I'll come back to you when the pregnancy test reads positive. And he just said, okay. And then 2 days later, I got a positive pregnancy read. And then he said, reiteration, I will not be questioning your intuition. And so that could be a very simple question when you're interviewing pediatricians. What is your take on mother's intuition? Where do you sit with that? And just step back and see what they say. Don't give them too much information and see what they say. And maybe that could be even an opening question, right? Because that is why I've been able. Me and my doctor have had differences of opinion in many things. And he just allows me to have my own decision-making ability. And so just, I don't know, I'm trying to think about ways that people can have, because you're very vulnerable as a new parent. I'm not even a new parent, and I'm vulnerable.
Feel vulnerable.
It's like, of course you want to do everything you can. And of course you're going to turn down any internal voice if you do have somebody telling you, if you don't do this, something bad will happen to your child. But I don't know, like being, in the profession that you're in, if there's any other things you can offer people in terms of tools or things you could ask to make sure that they're going to get the support in the way that they need, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I love the question about how do you feel about mother's intuition or parent or caregiver intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would tell you a lot about a provider, hearing how they answer that question. What I often advise people to ask is, are the doctors willing to, even if we have different ideas about food, weight, and bodies, are you willing to not talk about it? And especially not talk about it in front of my kid. Like, I wish that there was like weight-inclusive pediatricians everywhere and we all had access. But at least I know where I live, we don't have weight-inclusive pediatricians. But our pediatrician and I have an agreement that she does not talk about anything food, weight, body related when my kids are in the room. And it hasn't come up, but I don't want to talk about it without them in the room either. But that's our agreement. And she remembers every year. And just the fact that she remembers makes taking my kids to the doctor a whole different experience. It's a small thing to just remember that you have a family who doesn't talk about food or body size and doesn't want to see the, ridiculous growth chart and all of that. But it means that every year I don't have to repeat the same thing. And that makes the whole experience much more positive.
Yeah. I think that is important.
Yeah.
But just the willingness to be like, okay, this might be a priority for you, but it's not for us. And so just respecting our wishes in that way, I think that goes a long way. When you talked about that transition away from, recognizing like my body isn't the problem to be fixed and letting go of a lot of those previous behaviors, I think you mentioned somewhere, I think on your socials, about how you took a break, like you had to take a break from movement. And I can absolutely relate to that. And I think it's hard for people to grasp, especially if you're in the health, wellness, fitness industry. It's like, what, a break from movement? But I would love if you're willing to kind of talk about what that looked like for you and how that was beneficial and important to you. I think our listeners would benefit from that.
Sure. For me, my whole life, movement was about burning calories or trying to lose weight. And that's the way that I was taught that movement should be. And certainly, like, as I got older, that's what movement was all about. And movement was such a huge part of my eating disorder that there was really no way for me to heal from my eating disorder and continue to do movement at the same time. I had to take a break from movement in order to trust that I could have a relationship with food that was about my own needs, not about something related to movement, in order to trust that, like, I didn't have to do any movement in order to exist in the world, that it wasn't like a moral obligation. I wasn't a failure as a person if I decided never to move again. And I think it took a lot, actually longer than I thought. When I stopped doing movement, I didn't have a plan of this is when I'm going to return, or I didn't even have a plan that movement will be a part of my life again. But it took a long time, even I think 2 maybe or so years into taking a break from movement, I thought I was ready and I started to do some movement again. But for me, I went back to the kind of movement I had been doing in my eating disorder, and pretty quickly it got captured and caught up in that way right away. And I had to stop again and take some more time off. And there came a point where the desire for movement was a feeling inside my body, not a thought in my head. And I did movement that was totally different. It was movement that I never had done before, was never a part of my eating disorder, was something I enjoy. And that's the thing that has changed my relationship with movement. And sometimes something will come up. I may have had the plan to move a certain day and then I don't. And that I can just roll with it. It doesn't bring up any anxiety. It's I move on the days I want to. If I don't feel like it, I don't. I can take breaks. There's so much more flexibility in it that when I do it, I like it. It feels good. And when my body's not today, then I don't do it,
Oh, I love that. And I want to highlight a few things and reiterate, especially for our audience, because we're a fitness, we have a fitness app, we have a platform, we focus on movement and mentality. But I want to be clear, because I think that a lot of people who come to our product and our community are used to or want to be, or maybe in their past are very active people and valued exercise and saw movement as this great privilege and this thing they wanted to do, and very well may have used it to, try to control their body weight. And I think that there is a sense of shame associated with not doing it. I host some of our community calls, and sometimes people will come on oh yeah, I messed up. I didn't do my workout this week. And I'm oh, that's okay. What was going on this week? Oh, I was moving, or my daughter was sick. And I'm oh, so you had real life stuff happening that prevented you from doing this one thing. And what I had that full conversation to highlight this one point. Physical activity is a beautiful thing, and it can benefit you in so many ways, but you are more than a body. And if you're going through something emotionally, or you have something going on with a family member, or you're feeling sick, or life is happening, you don't have to feel like there's a sense of shame around not prioritizing movement. And I think people can sort of understand that when we're talking about a day, a week, maybe a month. But you just said that you had to take a break for years. And I think a lot of people would struggle with admitting that, going through that, and then coming to terms with what your life looks like when you're in the midst of that, right? But also, you are recovering from a condition that could have taken your life. So at the end of the day, you were prioritizing your life over some of the great benefits of movement. And that's okay. As a matter of fact, it's more than okay, in my opinion. It's very brave. It's very smart. It's wise. And it just goes to show that sometimes the best things we can do to care for ourselves is a workout. And then other times is absolutely avoiding a workout. And I want people to know that, we promote fitness and movement, but sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to not move.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you did was you highlighted how we can discern that.
Yeah.
Which is, do I feel it in my body, or is it in my head?
Yeah.
And we all know that feeling of I'm tired. Sometimes I come home and I'm I just need to be horizontal.
That's what ideally.
That's what I say to my family. Like, I need to be, like, this is the position my body needs to be in order to, like, that's where I am. And so that feeling. Last night I came home and I was like, oh, my back. Like, I need to move my back. It's like none of that's coming from my head.
Yeah.
It's all coming from a feeling in my body. And I think what happens is we're totally having disconnection between our mind and our body. We have the feeling. And then our mind talks us out of the feeling constantly. And so it's like you're saying, listen to that feeling and go from that space. Like, do you feel like resting? Do you feel like sleeping? Do you feel like walking? Do you feel like doing nothing for 2 years? Do that. Do what your body is telling you to do, not what your mind, your conditioned mind that has not by anyone's fault, been placed in a culture that is giving you messages of shoulds. We're going to be doing this big redesign on our product. And one of the things I want to tell the designer is like, I don't know if she might be like, that's not how you do this, Katie, but whatever. Like no shoulds.
No shit.
Like do what you feel like doing.
Yeah.
If you come for 3 minutes to a class or 1 minute to a class or you don't come to the class, all of that is success. Because it's just so hard. We just like set ourselves up for that. And then it's like, anyway. I could go on about this forever. I'm just like, do what you feel like doing. Like, stop playing by the quote unquote rules.
Yeah.
I think that you were saying that, and I started thinking, stop shoulding all over yourself.
Yeah.
That's what we kept saying yesterday. But no, I think that's just really important to highlight. So I would love to know more about the work that you're doing with people and how, that transition for you and that new belief that like my body doesn't need to be fixed, how you are able to, I guess, convey that to your clients, the people that you're working with. And I assume that the relatability is there. They can understand that you've gone through some of the things they've gone through. And I know that helps. But how does that sort of influence how you work, with the people that you get to work with now?
Most of the people that I work with now, when they first come to me, they have some awareness of what I do and have like at least started to question diet culture or like weight cycling. Like there's some question of like something about this isn't feeling great for me, but I don't know what it is and I don't know what is different out there. And we spend a lot of time in that place where somebody kind of has one foot in dieting and one foot in maybe there's something different. And a lot of the early work is kind of me sitting with people as they try that one last diet or, feel like they need to do this another time in order to really show themselves like this isn't going to work because maybe there's, some magic thing that's going to produce sustainable weight loss. And then it's a grieving process. Like we move into a place of grief. And it's a lot of grieving when we get to that place of reckoning with all of the lies we've been told, and the thing that we were taught is gonna, make us happy is not there for us, that it's not true. It's not, achievable. It's not sustainable. Like there's a lot of grieving that has to happen. And we usually move people through go through grieving and anger and grieving and anger. And then it's a process of externalizing. Like, what we were saying before, your body is not the problem. Over and over and over again in a million different ways where it shows up. I think we start calling out weight stigma and anti-fat bias when we see it so that it's being named. And I think that's important to people. Building community is a huge part of the work that I do. I love when people can have, more local community, but this is a place that virtual community can be great support. And so we build community, try to help people shift their social media feeds so that they're being more exposed to fat liberation content. And over time, people come to a place of body trust, talk a lot about the goal is not to love your body every minute because that's pretty much impossible in our culture. But can you live in a place where you have respect for your body or acceptance or trust. Like different words resonate for different people, but that there's a presence of you inside your body that is guiding you, and it's not about blame or shame.
That feels so good. It does. It really does.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing and for having this discussion with us and giving people permission to explore a path that will, obviously benefit their lives in such a meaningful way. So we're so, just grateful to have had this conversation with you. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners more about where they can find you and the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I love having these conversations. I'm primarily on Instagram, which is at Dr. Rachel Millner. My website is Rachel Millner Therapy. But in terms of the socials world, I'm primarily on Instagram.
Wonderful. Same.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.